The punch wasn't meant to change anything. It wasn't thrown with anger or confidence or even intent. It came from instinct, from a moment where fear stopped talking and the body answered for itself. But when the glove connected, solid, sharp, unmistakably real, the sound cut through the gym like a dropped weight in a silent room. Conversations died mid-sentence. The rhythm of training broke. And in that suspended second, everyone understood the same thing at once. The hierarchy they'd accepted without question had just cracked. One round. The gym had its own kind of morning light, dull and unforgiving, filtering through high windows streaked with years of dust. The walls were lined with old posters, fighters frozen in moments of victory that smelled faintly of sweat and nostalgia. This was not a place for beginners, not really. It pretended to welcome everyone. But the unspoken rules were clear: prove you belonged, or fade into the corners. Mark Vega ruled this space effortlessly. He was the head trainer, the loudest voice, the final word. His confidence wasn't loud because it didn't need to be, but when he chose to use it, it landed hard. People trusted him because he looked like he'd earned every ounce of authority his presence carried. When Noah walked in, he disrupted nothing, and that was the problem. He moved carefully, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes scanning the room as if expecting it to reject him outright. His gear was new, untouched by experience, and his posture told the story before he ever opened his mouth. Mark noticed him immediately. He always noticed weakness. To Mark, it wasn't cruelty, it was efficiency. If someone couldn't handle a joke, they wouldn't handle a punch. So when Mark mocked Noah, casually and publicly, it felt less like bullying to the room and more like tradition. Laughter followed automatically, the kind that came from people grateful the spotlight wasn't on them. Noah absorbed it all quietly. He didn't snap back, didn't retreat, didn't make excuses. He just nodded and did what he was told. As the session went on, his flaws became obvious. His punches lacked confidence, his footwork tangled under pressure, and his breathing betrayed how overwhelmed he felt. Mark corrected him loudly, sharply, turning every mistake into a lesson wrapped in humor at Noah's expense. It wasn't personal. At least, that's what Mark told himself. This was how people learned. This was how he'd learned. But Noah kept showing up. Between corrections and comments, between laughter and glances that dismissed him as temporary, he listened. He adjusted. Slowly. Invisibly. While Mark focused on what Noah lacked, he missed what Noah was building. Not skill. Not yet, but awareness. Noah began to understand space, timing, the subtle pauses between movements. He watched how Mark shifted his weight, how confidence sometimes slipped into carelessness. Noah didn't look like someone preparing for a fight. He looked like someone memorizing a language. When Mark Berdlush ed a sparring round, it wasn't meant as a challenge. It was meant as punctuation, a way to remind everyone, especially Noah, where the ceiling was. One round, light work, nothing serious. The room quieted anyway, because everyone understood what light meant when it came from someone like Mark. Noah hesitated only for a moment before agreeing. Fear was there, obvious and raw, but it didn't send him running. It anchored him. Inside the ring, the difference between them looked comical. Mark moved with ease, relaxed, smiling, tapping Noah's guard, touching his forehead like a parent correcting a child. Each light jab carried a message. You're not ready. You don't belong here yet. Noah backed up, stiff and overwhelmed, but he didn't fall apart. He covered up, took the shots, felt the embarrassment burn hotter than the contact. Mark pressed a little more, enjoying the lesson, enjoying the control. The gym watched, half interested, half sympathetic, already certain how this would end. Then Mark stepped in too close. Not because Noah forced him, because Mark stopped respecting him. In that instant, Noah slipped. It wasn't pretty or practiced, but it was real. His feet planted before his mind could interfere. His hips turned the way they'd turned 1,000 times in his imagination. The hook came out clean, driven by timing rather than strength. When it landed, the sound was wrong, too solid, too honest. Mark felt it immediately. Not pain exactly. Recognition. The gym went silent. Mark stepped back, surprise written openly across his face, his hand brushing his jaw as if confirming what just happened. Noah froze, shocked by his own action, unsure whether he'd crossed an invisible line. The mood shifted palpably. Mark's smile was gone now. What replaced it wasn't anger. It was focus. He raised his guard properly and came forward with intent. This was no longer a demonstration. This was a test. Mark pressured Noah with everything experience could offer: angles, feints, control. Noah took hits, lost balance, nearly fell. But something fundamental had changed. He wasn't flinching anymore. He wasn't thinking about failing. He was listening to the space between punches, trusting his body to respond. When Mark swung wide again, habit betraying him under pressure, Noah ducked and answered with another hook. Deeper, heavier, undeniable. The bell rang before anyone could process it. Noah stood there breathing hard, staring at his gloves as if they belonged to someone else. Mark leaned on the ropes, not defeated, but undeniably humbled. The room didn't cheer. It didn't need to. Everyone felt it. This wasn't about winning or losing. It was about assumption and how fragile it was. Mark climbed out of the ring slowly and stood in front of Noah, studying him without judgment for the first time. When he spoke, his voice was quieter, stripped of performance. He didn't apologize. He didn't need to. He acknowledged. Sometimes that was heavier. Mark didn't raise his voice after that. That alone told the room something had shifted. He stood there for a moment longer than necessary, eyes still on Noah, as if trying to recalibrate an internal scale that had been reliable for years and had just failed him. Around them, the gym slowly came back to life. Weights clanked again, someone cleared their throat, a jump rope resumed its rhythm. But the energy was different now, unsettled like a room after an argument no one wanted to name. Noah wiped sweat from his face, hands still trembling, not from fear anymore, but from the aftershock of realizing he'd crossed a line he didn't know existed. Training didn't end early that day, but it changed. Mark kept his distance for the rest of the session, watching instead of directing, observing instead of correcting. Noah stayed quiet, working through drills with a focus that surprised even him. Without the constant commentary, he could hear his own breathing, feel the floor beneath his feet, sense how balance came and went depending on how honestly he moved. Other members stole glances his way, some curious, some respectful, a few openly skeptical. One round didn't erase a reputation, but it planted doubt where certainty had lived comfortably. Over the next few days, the gym tested Noah in small, unspoken ways. Partners went a little harder than necessary. Corrections came sharper, more precise. No one mocked him anymore, but no one helped him either. Mark watched all of it without intervening. It wasn't punishment, it was assessment. Noah absorbed the pressure the same way he had absorbed the punches, by staying present. He didn't try to prove anything. He focused on consistency, on showing up early, leaving late, listening more than he spoke. The confidence he'd come in searching for didn't arrive as a feeling. It arrived as behavior. Eventually, Mark stepped back into his role, not as a performer, but as a teacher. His feedback became quieter, more technical. He stopped correcting Noah in front of others and started doing it between rounds, brief and specific. The gym noticed. Respect followed, not loudly but inevitably. Noah was no longer the beginner. He was just another fighter on the floor, earning his space the hard way. The irony wasn't lost on Mark. For years, he believed pressure had to be loud to be effective, that intimidation was just another training tool. Noah challenged that without meaning to. Not by being better, not by being stronger, but by refusing to disappear. One round had cracked Mark's certainty, but what followed reshaped it. Authority didn't come from dominance alone. Sometimes it came from knowing when you were wrong. Weeks later, the moment faded into gym lore, retold with exaggeration and missing details. Some said Noah dropped Mark. Others said Mark let it happen. The truth lived somewhere quieter, less dramatic, and more important than any version that made good storytelling. It lived in the way Mark trained differently now, and in the way Noah carried himself, grounded, alert, unafraid of learning in public. The story didn't end with applause or confrontation, because real shifts rarely announce themselves that way. What followed was quieter, slower, and far more permanent. In the weeks after that sparring round, the gym continued its routines as if nothing extraordinary had happened, yet every interaction carried a subtle awareness of what had been revealed. Mark no longer relied on mockery as his opening move. He still pushed people hard, harder than most trainers would, but there was intention behind it now, a measured patience that hadn't been there before. He watched more closely, listened more carefully, and adjusted instead of assuming. The authority he held didn't weaken, it deepened. People didn't fear disappointing him anymore. They feared wasting his attention. For Noah, the change was internal long before it became visible. The confidence he had once described so simply no longer felt like something he was chasing. It became something he practiced. He learned that strength wasn't a sudden transformation, but a series of quiet decisions. To stay after class when his legs trembled, to ask questions even when his voice shook, to accept correction without defending his ego. Each day he returned to the gym. He carried less of the need to prove himself and more of the responsibility to improve. That shift made him dangerous in the best way. Not reckless, not aggressive, but composed. Others began to notice. New members watched Noah the way Noah had once watched everyone else, gauging where they fit in the unspoken order. Some recognized themselves in his earlier hesitation. A few even approached him, asking for tips, for reassurance, for confirmation that it was possible to survive being the weakest person in the room. Noah never played the role of mentor outright, but he answered when asked. He understood now that belonging wasn't granted, it was sustained. Mark eventually addressed the moment directly, not in a speech, not in an apology, but in a decision. He changed how first rounds were handled. No more public humiliation disguised as motivation. No more using beginners as examples. The gym didn't soften, but it became sharper, more honest. People still failed there. They still got hit, still struggled, still doubted themselves. But the failure felt purposeful instead of performative. That distinction mattered. The round itself faded into memory, but its lesson didn't. It lived in how Mark coached, how Noah trained, and how the gym breathed differently now. Everyone understood something they hadn't before. Talent could hide behind nerves, and arrogance could masquerade as authority. One careless assumption, one underestimated person, was enough to expose both. Years later, no one would remember the exact combination Noah threw or how hard it landed. They would remember the pause afterward, the silence, the recalibration, the moment when certainty lost its grip. They would remember that power wasn't always loud, and that respect, once earned the right way, didn't need to be defended. In the end, it was never about the punch. It was about what happened when it landed and what everyone chose to do after.